Hello and welcome to Insurance Business TV for our first Environmental Insurance Power Panel, where we're taking a look at environmental insurance risks and insurance challenges. We've assembled a couple of experts. Carla Wilson is Head of Environment and Climate Change at Allianz Australia Insurance, and Anthony Saunders is Partnership Director for EnviroSure at Galgates Insurance Australasia. A very happy welcome to you both. Welcome to the panel. You both have quite different responsibilities in the environmental insurance space, so I think it's worth spelling those out a little. Carla, you're a scientist turned Allianz ESG and climate change executive. Can you start by just briefly explaining your role exactly?
Yeah, and look, I'll give you a tiny bit of background first. I grew up in New Zealand, surrounded by natural hazards and beautiful landscapes. So it wasn't surprising that I ended up in earth and environmental sciences and then established a career in this space. And I was particularly fortunate to have role models like Helen Clark, an extraordinary change maker for New Zealand, Al Gore and David Attenborough, very front and centre when I was early in my career. My move to the insurance industry, which has been in more recent years, came as a result of recognizing very clearly that the insurance industry is playing a huge role in preparing Australia for the impacts of climate change and also in driving the transition to a low carbon economy. So every day at Allianz, I see climate change risks impacting our customers and the insurance industry itself. And it doesn't matter if it's property insurance, personal injury insurance, environmental liability, all areas of insurance are being impacted in some way. So the primary purpose of my role as Head of Environment and Climate Change at Allianz Australia is to embed climate change risks, mitigation and environmental awareness into business strategy, claims, products, operations, and our investments. So I lead, drive and shape the climate and environmental elements of the sustainability strategy, making sure that it's embedded across business strategy and not standalone. We have a particular focus at Allianz on caring for our customers and our communities by trying to help them build resilience. And this means that I need to provide leadership and advice to the business on things like physical, transition and liability, climate change risks, emissions reduction, pollution, biodiversity, and greenwashing. And what I absolutely love about my role is that I'm able to drive change and uplift capability across the business so that we can provide better solutions for our customers and help to prepare them for increasing impacts and events.
Great, thank you, Carla. Anthony, you're a broker and you also advise ANZIIF and the Australian Climate Council on environmental insurance issues. Can you sort of briefly talk a bit about what you see as your role as a broker in this space?
Definitely broker's role is to seek to find resolve or solutions and convince the insurance companies to work with us in trying to deliver those solutions. In certain areas where the insurance companies can provide services independently, we might come up with new ideas on how to deliver products better or deliver products where they can't be delivered. Look, as an example, when I was working with the Climate Change Committee, we came up with this idea that if it costs so much to relocate a family after a house has been built and dealing with the issues of a family that's lost their home that wasn't insured, what a great idea it would be if the government sort of like took on the other governments, certain governments like Sweden, to arrange the insurance for everyone nationally, and come up with and work on solutions where cover can be provided in areas such as bushfire or flood zones that haven't been provided before. And it might take a simple solution like, what would happen if we increase the excess on these properties to, say, $100,000? There's a lot of financial infrastructure work and research that's got to be that would be involved in putting together such a concept that if we follow what other countries have done, things are possible. So I believe that the brokers an insurance broker's role is to try and find solutions either for a single client, and when we're talking about climate change, what can we do to improve the interests of insurance companies to enter a market for the purpose of all our benefits.
Yeah, your answer has already captured a lot of the complexity and the challenges around this whole issue of environmental insurance and what to do about the environment. But when you both think about the environment and the insurance risks, can I get you to boil it down a bit? What do you see as an urgent one, and why? Carla, let's start with you.
Well, one thing I think that concerns me is that businesses that have not historically been impacted by climate change, events. So because things are changing in severity and frequency, and spatial boundaries are changing with regard to where somebody might be affected by flood, businesses are not thinking about environmental risks. So most businesses, things like petrol stations or tank farms or big industrial sites, they're already thinking about this because that's something that's potentially expected. A pollution or environmental incident might occur in one of those types of sites. But there's all sorts of sites, I think, that need to start thinking about the future and about how, as climate change impacts change over time, they might be impacted. Things like mixed retail, landscaping, plumbing contractors, transportation companies, hospitals, even playing fields. So these businesses and these activities can be exposed from a third-party property damage and cleanup costs and business interruptions. An interesting example, I think, is last year in 2024 in Sydney, when there was, a widely spoken about event with contaminated bark and mulch that was spread across parks and playgrounds and that kind of thing. And that led to prosecutions from the supplier and insurance claims as a result from potential health risks. So I think that businesses need to start thinking about that perhaps their standard property insurance doesn't have pollution cover. Have a look at what kind of cover that they have. And as extreme events are going beyond their normal boundaries, we are going to see an increase in environmental incidents, I think, and businesses need to start thinking about these risks and planning for those to think, okay, it hasn't happened in the past. That doesn't mean it's not going to happen in the future.
No, thanks, Carla. You very politely talking about that asbestos mulch issue. I think that was a huge story across Australia. Anthony, let's move to you. What do you see as a really big environmental insurance issue, and why?
Well, two things. There's a climate change point of view, and you'll need to remind me what the second one is. But from a climate change point of view, if we take the island of Tuvalu, which is literally is starting to go under, that the ocean level is rising, and it was in the papers. It's public information. It's in the papers. The Australian government is working towards evacuating the island and providing visas to all those people to come to Australia. I mean, climate change is real. There's no doubt about it. And we can talk about the technical issues like the centrifugal effect of the Earth spinning and why these islands near the equator are actually starting to disappear under the water, but the fact is it's there. So we've got to so evacuation is pretty extreme, and it's the same as the house burning down and someone's got to be evacuated. The issues come down to what infrastructure needs to be put in place to avoid, to be prepared and to avoid these expected disasters that are creeping up on us. Going back to and as far as the insurance companies are concerned, why would you want to insure something when it's inevitable that it's going to burn down or sink or flood or what have you? It's companies like Allianz who are investing in understanding what we can do as a community in our insurance industry is it's a valuable contribution. it really is a valuable contribution. The other thing, that's right, I wanted to just mention about the green mulch. The mulch gate with the asbestos in the mulch. From a risk point of view, we don't expect asbestos to be in every bucket load of mulch or truckload of mulch. But what we can do is transfer a greater level of professional responsibility onto those that are producing the mulch in the recycling industry to ensure they obtain third-party validation and ensure that what leaves their premises is exactly what they were producing. That process of a validation process does involve an impact on the turnover of the business because it slows the process down. And I should say, and not but, and the reality is if we're dealing with things relating to human health and safety, then we've got to take these things seriously because people will go to jail as a result of not being responsible. So coming back to environmental liability insurance, or the role that a broker has to play, is becoming more complicated in the environmental sector because we have to provide a level of education to the clients to understand what they need to reduce the probability of risk.
Yeah, your answer sort of touching on the whole risk management challenge, I guess, of these environmental issues. Anthony, let's stick with you. When it comes to the businesses that you're dealing with or not dealing with, which ones of these businesses could do with risk managing this whole thing a bit better than they're currently doing?
Well, you don't want to pick on an industry that's just been sued for $100 million. We could all improve our professional responsibilities. And overarching is that commonly most companies don't see the importance in having professional indemnity insurance in place. They can be sued for loss of third-party income, and the public liability policy won't respond. Or the people with mulch are confused and they have a public and products liability policy, but it's not covering any product recall or providing a defense for that. So these covers that we can put in place for industry in the environmental sector, for those industries that we rely upon, can be arranged, but it has to go, and it goes hand in hand with an education with the client that they understand how to transfer risk, transfer responsibility, improve outcome.
Carla, what's your view on environmental covers and the businesses that maybe could use them but perhaps don't?
Well, I think, watching globally, because Allianz has a global business, and I've been talking to one of our senior experts in the US, because the environmental liability incidents and insurance is pretty huge in the US. The laws and regulations are really complex, that prosecution is more readily available to people or more accessible, and all the increased media coverage for the LA fires, all those types of things are getting to people thinking about how these types of events might be impacting businesses that they haven't done before. And you only need to look at, in New South Wales, the recent flooding events and those people that were not insured. Those sorts of things are driving change in the market. Looking at people starting to think about, where are the coverage gaps in my insurance? Some of the industries that I've really been interested in looking at recently that were not expected to me, and I'm sure people who work in this space like Anthony more all the time with the environmental liability insurance, are things like hotels with mold growth and Legionnaire's disease, poor waste management practices leading to pollution incidents, farms in regards to their waste management, the way they store fertilizer, and impacting neighbouring properties and waterways. And one really interesting case I read quite a bit about, and it's something that you often think about environmental incidents being hazardous materials, but very often it can be quite benign materials that just shouldn't be where they've landed. Things like milk, so large milk tankers, releasing milk into the environment and then having a great impact and requiring cleanup costs. So from my perspective, I think all companies need to be thinking about these types of issues, talking to brokers, talking to people about where they might have, some risk that is currently exposed. As I said, I think that the tricky part is getting people to think that you can't rely on history. You can't rely on the way things have been and the way that your business has managed risk because of the impacts of climate change in particular. Physical liability and transition, you need to be thinking, how going forward could my business be impacted? And do I need to put new management practices in place or procedures, or do I need to talk to a broker about, my coverage? So for me, I think it's probably the less obvious companies and industries and activities that need to be thinking about how things are going to change and how they might need to consider that.
Carla, let's stick with you for our last question. I mean, what do you see as the most important forces driving change in this insurance area?
Well, I kind of made it pretty clear. I think it's climate change. And I think that the impacts of climate change are becoming serious and increasingly urgent. We have insurance unaffordability, claims costs are rising, reinsurance is getting more difficult to access. Predictions and modeling is harder because things are changing. It's a dynamic kind of environment. And the impact on customers, particularly those experiencing vulnerability, is just becoming very difficult to watch, to be honest. When you're watching the news and you see these events, you see people in repeated events, and that is absolutely heartbreaking. Every time you turn on the news or listen to the radio, you hear about floods, storms, droughts, cyclones, bushfires. And I don't just mean in Australia. I mean, every season there's somewhere in the world that is having some kind of extreme event. And there's things so floods and extreme events impact critical infrastructure. Of course they do. And so you've got to think about the types of critical infrastructure that store and manage substances that shouldn't be being released into the soil or the air or the water. Things like landfills, sewage treatment plants, as we've talked about, storage tanks and industrial facilities. And I saw this firsthand. In 2011, I was seconded from Brisbane City Council to the CEO's office of Lockyer Valley Regional Council immediately following the floods, and that was to help with flood recovery waste management. I was meant to stay there for 3 to 4 weeks. I ended up staying 5 years in the CEO's office, going through 2 major flood events. So for me, that was incredibly eye-opening, the type of impact that floods can have. There's things that are not quite as obvious, and the way that it can impact waste and facilities is incredible. And notwithstanding the damage to the environment, people, and biodiversity, pollution incidents can lead to incredibly expensive cleanup costs, remediation activities, compensation, business disruption, economic losses, and impacts on our healthcare systems. So for me, the driving change is the frequency and severity of these extreme events, causing great financial difficulty and implications, as well as health and mental health too. What's significant is I think that many companies are not thinking about what's to come, and particularly those who haven't had a problem in the past. So what I think from my perspective, the call to action really is for people to start thinking about how these things are going to impact them and think outside the box. Do some reading, look at past events, most recent past events, things that are starting to appear in the media and whether or not that affects their business. So for me, definitely the impacts of climate change.
And Anthony, what about you?
Yeah, I was just thinking about the Bushfire Climate Committee. Interesting financial statistic that for each home that is burnt down, the costs associated with dealing with depression, relocation, re-education, involving a number of non-government organisations such as Beyond Blue, etc., is costing the government, I said, $250,000 per family. So from a financial perspective, if we had insurance in place with a $100,000 excess, I'm not harping on that, just the concept, then basically the government's costs are being immediately cut from $250,000 down to $100,000. And the argument on that was that these families can get excited about having a home rebuilt and being relocated and getting the new car, etc. If financial solutions were also considered as something that was anathema to those who are providing all those services already, because I think, well, if those financial solutions are put in place, we may not have a job anymore. I think what Carla has said, what Allianz is saying, is that we can find solutions together, and those solutions involve having improved infrastructure, and from a reliance point of view, I think maybe we can see that there's going to be pressure on insurance companies to start providing the services to appropriately rebuild, rather than just give people cash and think they're making them happy. Sorry, that's probably not the right, that's a bit of a throwaway, but we need to see more collaboration at all aspects, from insurance brokers to insurance companies to government, when we're dealing with issues that we're generally referring to as climate change. We can also say some of the reasons of climate change also arises as far as logging, etc. I was reading an article about the amount of logging that we're doing in Australia, and not catering for allowing for those forests to be rebuilt, is creating a new climate area that may result in a massive locust storm. I mean, do your research and just read all about what happens with what may happen. But it seems that we're putting too much emphasis on getting things done quickly and moving on, whereas I think climate change is actually, I think here it is. I think climate change is giving us all the opportunity to start thinking more collaboratively and solution-wise so that our kids have a better future. Or that we believe that we're providing a better future for our children. And I think this collaboration means, and I think the wonderful part about this opportunity to speak, to share with you, is that the more insurance brokers and our insurance community embrace and understand the fact that the reason why pollution exclusions are sitting in policies is because no one's ever really bothered to really understand what's going on. And it is complex, and it's fun, and it gives you something to talk about, and we can be great contributors to our industry. I enjoy the challenge. That's my thing, and hopefully others can be inspired to work in the industry as well. I think definitely from a broker point of view, the most difficult part for our role of a broker is dealing with a client who is an environmental scientist or some sort of climate change expert, etc. And they're talking to us and say, "Yeah, what do you know about our industry really anyway?" And I've said to them, seriously, if I knew as much about your industry as I knew about my industry, I wouldn't be in my industries. Our role is to understand risk and the potential of that risk, and to share that with insurance companies about how we're going to address and improve that risk does actually start opening up insurance company interest in the environmental and recycling market. I mean, that's what, this doesn't have to be the best kept secret, and this is why we're having this discussion. But we are working working closely with insurance companies, and therefore we provide solutions and provide insurance to the environmental sector.
Oh, well, thanks very much, Anthony, and thank you, Carla. You're both very passionate advocates, and it's such a critical issue. I think we've peeled back a little bit of it, but we'll look forward to delving in a bit deeper in future panels like this one with you guys. So thank you to you both, and thanks for watching Insurance Business TV. Bye for now.